Part 1. The Mouth of Silence. In the last hours of twilight, when the world hushed itself and even the birds dared not sing, you stood at the edge of the forest where the trees grew too tall and too still. Their bark was silver gray and etched with symbols no botanist would ever catalogue. Each tree leaned inward as if bowing towards something hidden, something waiting. You had followed no map, only a dream. It had come to you for 9 nights in a row, a flickering path beneath the soil, a glowing river that ran sideways, and a voice that whispered your name, not with sound but with memory. And so you walked, past the last village, past the weathered stones carved by no modern hand, past the warnings painted on rocks in fading red dye. Turn back. It lives below. But you didn't turn back. You followed the pull. The entrance revealed itself in the roots of a hill older than any mountain around it. Half covered in moss and sleeping ivy, the cave mouth looked like the yawning jaw of some long-dead creature. But it did not frighten you. If anything, the stillness called to something inside you. You stepped forward, ducking beneath the stone arch. The air changed. It was cooler, not just in temperature, but in time. The scent of the surface vanished, replaced by something deeper. Stone, yes, and dampness, but also the faintest trace of spice, smoke, and metal. The kind of smell that hinted at machines left running for millennia. The kind of smell that lived in forgotten corridors where time had softened. As you descended, the light faded behind you, and the earth embraced your footsteps with silence. The walls grew smoother, carved. Patterns emerged beneath your fingertips, spirals, ridges, grooves etched into the stone by hands not shaped like yours. Some curved too sharply, some stretched too long. Then came the first chamber. It was a circular room, impossibly round, lit from beneath the floor by a glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. In the center stood a single column spiraling upward and vanishing into shadow. The column was alive. You didn't see it move, but when you blinked, it had changed. A new symbol, a ripple in its base, a breath. You placed your hand against it. For a moment, everything fell away. Not just the cave, but your thoughts. You stood suddenly in a vast hall under a green sky. A city of towers floated on a sea of clouds. In the distance, figures walked, tall, scaled, graceful. They moved in rhythm, speaking with their hands, and their eyes glowed like embers. Then the vision was gone. The column stood still once more. Your breath caught, but your heart was calm. You knew, somehow, this was only the beginning. The next tunnel sloped downward, no stairs, just a smooth path that curved like a spine into the dark. As you walked, you passed murals carved into the walls, scenes of sunken continents, creatures curled around crystal cores, and staircases spiraling into stars. In one mural, a lizard-like being stood over a glowing orb, offering it to a circle of human figures. In another, a great flood washed over cities, and the scaled ones descended beneath the waves, vanishing into the earth. The path led into a second chamber. This one smelled of moss and warmth. Tiny lights flickered in the ceiling like fireflies, bioluminescent roots pulsing slowly. Pools of still water reflected the glowing canopy. You sat at the edge of one and looked in. But your reflection was not your own. It was you, but dressed in a robe of silver cloth, standing beside a tall figure with golden eyes and scaled skin. The figure reached out. Then the pool went dark. A soft sound came from behind, not footsteps, not quite. A rustle like fabric dragging across stone, slow and cautious. You turned, but the chamber was empty. Still, the sense of presence lingered. Someone, or something, was watching. Not with fear, with curiosity. You continued onward. The tunnel narrowed, but light bled in from unseen sources. The air thickened with warmth. At times you thought you heard voices, not speaking, but singing, a melody with no words, yet one you almost remembered. At last you reached a doorway carved not into the stone, but into a wall of glassy crystal. It shimmered faintly as you approached. Your hand hovered before it, unsure. And then the door opened, not with sound, but with understanding. The next chamber was vast, larger than any cathedral. It was lit from within by veins of amber running through the walls. In the center stood a city, small and perfect, like a model made from light and memory. Towers rose in delicate spirals, bridges of silver thread connected rooftops. And there, standing beside the glowing replica, was a figure. It was tall, perhaps 7 feet, scaled, not monstrous but regal. Its skin shimmered in greens and bronzes. Its eyes were ancient. It did not speak, but you felt something enter your mind. A warmth, a welcome, a recognition. You had been here before. Not in this life, perhaps, when the world was softer and the sky was not so high. The figure turned and gestured for you to follow. You did. Together you walked into the glowing city, and the earth closed quietly behind you. Part 2. The City Beneath the Roots. The city was not made of stone and steel, but of memory and light. As you stepped through its crystalline gates, the world grew impossibly still, like time itself had taken a breath and decided to wait for you. The pathways beneath your feet were not paved, but grown. Thin vines coiled into perfect patterns, hard as glass yet warm to the touch. With every step they glowed faintly beneath your soles, lighting the way in soft pulses of violet and gold. The tall figure who guided you walked without sound. Though their feet touched the ground, no echo followed. Their scales shimmered with ancient colors, the deep green of submerged forests, the soft bronze of desert ruins, and the quiet blue of midnight stones. Their robe, though simple, moved like mist, trailing behind in slow, whispering folds. You wanted to ask questions, who they were, where you were, but words no longer felt necessary. The answers were already with you, tucked in some part of the mind not used in waking life. The buildings around you breathed, not literally, perhaps, but something about them changed with your presence. As you passed, their shapes shifted gently, adjusting to your direction. Arches widened, doorways blinked open like the eyelids of sleeping giants. The city seemed alive, not just in function, but in spirit. You paused before a structure that rose like a spire of frozen water. It was impossibly tall and impossibly delicate. Within, you could see figures moving, not walking, but floating slowly, as if submerged in dreams. Their silhouettes were faint and glowing, their movements graceful. You knew without knowing that they were not ghosts, not memories. They were alive in a way you could barely comprehend. Guardians, perhaps, or dreamers. Your guide stopped before a round plaza surrounded by gently curving trees, their branches blooming with silver leaves. In the center stood a basin of dark water, rippling though no wind stirred. The figure raised a long-fingered hand and beckoned you closer. You looked into the basin. Images unfolded in its depths, a world turned backward in time. You saw oceans where deserts now lay. You saw stars in the sky no longer visible. You saw cities beneath the earth before they fell silent, and then you saw them, the scaled ones, the old ones, building, teaching, watching. They had not ruled, they had not conquered, they had preserved. When the surface burned, they descended. When the stars shifted, they adapted. And when the surface world forgot, they remembered. In silence, in patience, the basin grew still again. You stepped back, your mind heavy with knowledge not fully understood. And yet, there was peace in it, not fear, only awe. The figure turned and continued walking, and once again you followed. Now the city changed. The streets began to slope downward, spiraling slowly around a column of warm orange light. As you moved deeper, you noticed signs, symbols etched into the walls, glowing softly. Some looked like stars, others resembled eyes, and some were familiar. You had seen them in dreams, or in the corners of books you had never read. They welcomed you now as if returning home. The city narrowed. The buildings here were older, their surfaces cracked with age but still humming with quiet life. You passed a garden where crystals grew like flowers, their petals wide and glowing from within. A fountain flowed not with water, but with a shimmering mist that drifted upward instead of down, and beside it sat another of the old ones, this one smaller, older, wrapped in cloth that shimmered with colors no surface sun had ever cast. It looked up as you approached. Its eyes were different, not bright like the first guides, but deep, as if they held centuries behind them. You knelt without meaning to. It reached forward slowly and placed a single clawed finger against your forehead. A memory bloomed, not from your life, but from somewhere deeper. You stood in a hall of stone, offering a gift to a dying star. You walked beside a being who hummed words into the walls to wake the earth. You watched as cities fell to silence and were rebuilt in crystal. You were not yourself, but you were. Then the touch lifted, and the vision faded. The old one smiled, not with its mouth, but with the slow closing of its eyes, and then gestured toward a tunnel behind the fountain. The guide led you there now. As you stepped into the tunnel, the air grew warmer again. The walls here pulsed softly, as if breathing. The path ahead seemed endless, and yet welcoming. The hum in the stone grew louder, not in volume, but in presence. It was a song without words, a comfort. Your guide stopped and placed its hand against the wall. A doorway opened. Beyond it, a chamber unlike any you had seen. Round, vast, and silent, it contained no furniture, no lights, no sound. And yet, the center held something extraordinary, a sphere hovering in midair. Not metal, not stone, not even light. It was something else entirely. Pure memory, perhaps. Your guide turned to you. Finally it spoke, not aloud, but within. This is where the dream began. You stepped toward the sphere, and it opened. Part 3. The Memory Sphere. The moment the sphere opened, the world changed, not in light or sound, but in sensation. The chamber faded away. The walls, the guide, even the floor beneath your feet dissolved like mist in sunlight. You stood now in a different space, a memory, but not your own. The sky above was not black nor blue, but deep amber, swirling with pale clouds that moved too slowly to be weather. A windless silence spread across a landscape of glittering stone. Flat plains dotted with towering spirals and low circular buildings shaped like seashells. And across those plains moved the scaled ones. Dozens of them, tall and solemn, walked in rhythmic unison, humming softly to themselves as they moved. They were graceful, dressed in flowing layers of cloth, their gestures slow and deliberate. Each step they took left behind a soft glow that faded after a few breaths, like they were walking through time itself. You were among them, though they did not seem to see you. You watched as they gathered near a crystal obelisk in the center of the city. The structure hummed, resonating not with sound but with thought. Around it, the scaled ones raised their arms, palms upward. Then one of them stepped forward. She was taller than the rest, cloaked in emerald green fabric that trailed for yards behind her. Her eyes glowed gold, and when she turned her gaze toward the obelisk, the ground trembled. Not violently, but like the earth itself was listening. She began to sing. You heard nothing at first, only stillness. But slowly the melody came, not through your ears, but through your bones. The song flowed like a river through your spine, your ribs, your fingertips. The others joined in, their voices low and wide, layered like waves. The obelisk pulsed, once, then again, and then it opened. From within poured a cloud of silvery mist, floating upward in spirals. It did not drift into the sky, but curled downward, seeping into the stones, into the earth itself. It was being stored, preserved. You understood. This was memory, not just an event, not a story, but living memory, captured and planted like a seed, a piece of time folded into the earth, to be found again when the surface world was ready, or when it was gone. The scene shimmered and shifted. Now you stood on a cliff's edge, overlooking a vast plain of fire. Volcanoes belched smoke into a choking sky. The amber clouds had darkened to rust. The scaled ones moved quickly now, no longer singing. They carried objects, crystalline devices, scrolls of light, small glowing stones. Children walked among them, smaller but no less poised. Their faces were calm. No panic, only purpose. A great gateway stood behind them, an arch of smooth obsidian, shimmering with energy. One by one the beings passed through, vanishing into the earth. And then you saw the last one, the green-robed leader, turn back and raise her hand toward the horizon. The earth cracked behind her, swallowing light and sky. She stepped through the gate and it closed, sealing the memory inside. Everything blinked away. You were back in the chamber. The sphere hovered quietly, unchanged. You stumbled back, your breath unsteady, not from fear, but from weight. It was not a dream, not a vision. You had touched something vast and buried, something living. Your guide watched silently, then turned and began walking once more. You followed, without question. Now the halls changed again. The walls were no longer crystal or stone, but something smoother, organic, perhaps. They pulsed gently, the way sleeping creatures breathe. The light here came from no single source, yet everything was visible. You passed alcoves filled with artifacts, masks shaped like birds, tools that vibrated faintly when near, scrolls too delicate to touch. And you passed others, like you, travelers. Some sat in silence, meditating. Some walked slowly, eyes closed, as if dreaming while awake. One nodded to you as you passed, their eyes glazed with peace. No one spoke. You entered a chamber filled with water, not a pool, but a gentle stream, shallow and warm, flowing in a perfect circle. Your guide stepped in and gestured for you to do the same. The moment your feet touched the current, sound returned. Not noise, but a hum, a voice. We are the memory beneath memory, the breath beneath stone, the light beneath shadow. You have not come to learn, but to remember. The water glowed softly. In the current, images passed like leaves, cities lost to time, stars that fell from the sky, towers grown from the bones of sleeping titans. And there, walking among them, always the scaled ones, watching, waiting, preserving. The voice came again, softer. You are part of this, as you have always been. The surface forgets, but the deep remembers. You closed your eyes, the water circled your ankles, the voice circled your mind, and beneath it all, the earth dreamed on. Part 4. The Garden of Sleeping Suns. When you opened your eyes, the stream was gone. You stood at the edge of a vast cavern, but it was no cavern shaped by wind or time. This place had been built, not by hand, but by will. The ceiling arched high above, lost in violet mist, and hanging from it like fruit were orbs of soft golden light. They hovered motionless, like sleeping suns caught in a dream. The ground beneath your feet was soft, covered in moss the color of moonlight. It glowed faintly with each step you took, lighting a quiet path forward. Trees rose in spirals, their trunks smooth and silver, their leaves shifting in hue with every breath of air. Beneath them, flowers grew in impossible shapes, spirals, cubes, patterns that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. You were not alone. The old ones moved through the garden, silent and slow, like thoughts made flesh. Some stood still for hours, heads bowed before glowing pools. Others tended to the air itself, shaping it with their hands into ribbons of light that disappeared as soon as they were formed. And some watched you, not with suspicion but recognition, as if they had been expecting you for longer than the surface world had existed. One of them approached, walking without sound across the moss. This one was smaller than the guide who had first led you down, but there was something older in its posture. Its scales shimmered not with bright colors, but with the faded sheen of ancient stone, gray-green, like ruins worn smooth by rain. It raised a hand and touched 2 fingers to its chest. A greeting. You mirrored the gesture. The figure turned and walked toward the trees. You followed, each footstep releasing a soft chiming sound from the moss below. You walked together for some time, saying nothing. Around you, the garden shifted. The hanging suns pulsed gently. The trees grew farther apart. The air warmed. Eventually, you arrived at a clearing. At the center stood a stone table, low and round, carved with deep grooves in spiraling patterns. Laid across its surface were small objects, artifacts perhaps, but not ones shaped for war or for wealth. There were memory stones, tiny crystalline spheres that glowed from within. There were tools made of bone and metal and something that shimmered like still water. And among them, a book. It had no pages. The figure gestured toward it. You stepped forward and placed your hands upon it. The surface was smooth, cool, and oddly soft, like silk stretched over stone. The moment your skin touched it, the book opened, not with a sound, but with sensation. You were a child in another body, sitting beneath a tree that hummed lullabies. A scaled hand rested on your head, and a voice without sound filled your mind. The surface forgets, but you were born of both. The vision shifted. Now you stood in a great hall. Statues lined the walls, some of humans, some of the old ones, and some of beings stranger still, winged, eyeless, wrapped in vines. You held a staff in your hand, carved from root and stone, and before you stood a circle of lights, judging you, perhaps, or welcoming you. Then it faded. You were back at the table. The figure nodded slowly, as if satisfied, then turned and began walking once more. You followed them to the edge of the garden, where the moss ended and the stone began again. A wide passage opened ahead, its ceiling low and smooth. Strange glyphs glowed along the walls, shifting gently as you passed, like script that breathed. The passage led downward. You did not count the steps. They felt endless, but not in burden. You floated forward as if the earth itself carried you. Then the tunnel widened, and you saw the city. This was not the city of light from before. This one was deeper, older, built not for beauty but for permanence. The buildings here were immense, carved from living stone. No decorations, no glow, only form and purpose. Yet it was not lifeless. The ground still hummed beneath your feet. The air still shimmered with unseen music. And far in the distance, beneath a dome of shimmering crystal, stood a tower so tall it pierced the mists above. Your guide pointed toward it. That was where you were going. As you walked, you passed doors sealed shut with glowing runes. Some pulsed as you passed. Others remained dark. One flickered. You paused. Through its narrow window, you saw a shape move, a silhouette, not your guide, not one of the scaled ones. This figure was tall but wrong, jerky, watching. The door shimmered once and went dark. You stepped away. Your guide said nothing, but you noticed their pace quicken. The tower loomed now, its spiral walls etched with patterns that looped like language. No visible entrance stood before it, only a blank, smooth face of stone. Your guide placed both hands on the wall. A pulse moved through the stone like breath, and a doorway opened. You entered together into silence. Part 5. The Tower of Endless Echoes. The moment you stepped through the doorway, a hush settled over you like a velvet curtain. The air was cool, yet alive, humming softly with the vibration of 1,000 forgotten voices. The inside of the tower was vast, far larger than the smooth stone walls suggested from the outside. Its spiraling corridors stretched upward and downward in impossible arcs, fading into shadow and light that seemed to breathe. Your guide moved ahead with steady steps, their scaled skin glinting faintly in the ambient glow. You followed closely, your own footsteps muted against the polished floor that shimmered like water. Walls around you were carved with scenes, moments frozen in stone. Here, a great serpent coiled around a pillar of stars. There, a figure clad in flowing robes reached out to grasp a comet's tail. The carvings seemed to shift when you weren't looking, as if alive with quiet memories. You felt the tower itself was listening. As you ascended a gently spiraling ramp, whispers drifted into your mind, soft, half-remembered phrases in a language you could not speak, but somehow understood. They spoke of origins and endings, of worlds folded like paper, and the secrets buried beneath the surface of all things. Deeper into the tower, you reached a chamber ringed with mirrors, tall, narrow slabs that reflected not your present self, but countless others. You saw versions of you, both older and younger, in places you had never been, doing things you could not recall. Some mirrors showed scaled figures, their eyes bright and knowing, watching silently. Your guide paused and gestured toward one mirror that shimmered with a light unlike the others. As you stepped forward, the glass rippled like water, and you felt yourself pulled through. Suddenly, you stood on a vast plain beneath a twilight sky. The air was thick with the scent of rain and earth. In the distance, enormous trees stretched toward the stars, their branches tangled with glowing lanterns. Nearby, a group of lizard people sat in a circle, their scales catching the faint light as they spoke in soft tones. They held crystal orbs and chanted in a melody that stirred something deep within you, an echo of forgotten dreams. You approached silently, and one turned to face you. Their eyes were ancient but kind. They spoke without words, their thoughts brushing your mind like a gentle breeze. "You remember," they said. "We are the keepers of what was lost, the guardians of the deep places where memory sleeps." You nodded, though no words passed your lips. They rose and extended a hand, inviting you to join their circle. As you sat among them, the landscape around you shimmered and shifted, showing you visions of times when the surface was young, and the earth itself pulsed with life beneath your feet. They spoke of harmony between worlds, of knowledge passed in silence, and of waiting for the time when all would be remembered. The vision faded slowly, and you found yourself back in the chamber of mirrors. Your guide was waiting, a faint smile in their eyes. You continued your ascent, the whispers growing softer but no less profound. Each step brought you closer to the heart of the tower and to the secrets it held. Part 6. The Core of Silence. The final stair dissolved beneath your feet. There was no doorway, no threshold, and yet you crossed into a new space. The air changed. It felt older here, not heavy but sacred, as if it had been waiting for you across ages. The chamber at the tower's peak was shaped like a sphere. There were no corners, no edges, only endless curve. At its center floated a spiral of amber light, no larger than your outstretched hands. It rotated slowly, casting long, gentle shadows across the curved walls, which shimmered like pearl and breathed like silk. You stood in silence. There was nothing to say. Everything that could be spoken already lived here. Your guide stepped forward and bowed, not deeply but with reverence. The light responded, expanding for a moment, revealing tiny threads within itself. Stars, memories, lifetimes. You could feel it watching you, and not as a stranger. The spiral knew you, not from this life alone. You approached the light, it pulsed. Then the chamber vanished. You floated. There was no sky, no floor, only a vast, weightless dream. All around you, scenes unfolded in silence. You saw the earth before time, a glowing sphere cradled by stars, still forming, still dreaming. You saw rivers of light run through the stone, feeding cities that would never be remembered by history books. You saw the lizard people, taller, softer, kinder than the legends had ever described, tending vast machines of crystal and thought. They planted memories the way others plant seeds, and harvested light not for energy, but for remembrance. You saw a gathering, a council of old ones and human-like figures alike, seated in a chamber of roots and flame. They were not enemies. They were family, split by time. They did not speak in argument, but in harmony. And then you saw the moment the surface broke, a cascade of fire, a fall of stars, the oceans pulling themselves into the sky, and yet no panic, only a quiet decision. The old ones retreated inward, not in fear, but in trust. Trust that the surface would one day return to stillness, that those who walked beneath the sun would one day remember the quiet. The vision faded, and you were standing once more in the tower's heart. The spiral light hovered before you, pulsing gently. It gave no command, only invitation. Your guide turned toward you now, their eyes softer than you had seen them. They reached out, not to lead, but to offer. A hand, open, waiting. You took it, and the spiral entered you, not as fire, not as light, but as understanding. In an instant that stretched forever, you remembered who you were, not a name, but a presence, not a history, but a thread woven through time, through countless worlds and countless selves. And then it was quiet again. The spiral faded, the chamber dimmed, and your guide bowed once more. This time you bowed back. When you turned to leave, the path downward was already lit, but the tower no longer loomed above you. It rested beside you as if it had always been part of you. The earth accepted you again, not as a visitor, but as a child returned. And somewhere far below, the lizard people watched, not to protect, not to judge, only to witness. The deeper you went, the quieter the world became, until even thought melted into stillness. Part 7. The River Beneath Time. The path down from the tower became less of a staircase and more of a drift. You were not walking anymore. You were being carried not by hands or wind, but by something deeper, something like thought made gentle. The walls around you dissolved into mist, not fog. Mist like memory, soft, glowing, rich with the scent of warm stone and old wood. The ground gave way to a shimmering river, its surface smooth as glass, its current invisible yet certain. There were no oars, no need for them. A boat waited for you, oval, low, made from something that looked like silver carved from moonlight. You stepped in without question. It accepted your weight like a cradle and began to move. The river carried you through silence. Not empty silence, but full silence, the kind that vibrates softly in your chest, reminding you that you are not alone. Shapes drifted through the mist at the edges of vision, towers upside down, staircases that folded into themselves, creatures curled like sleeping thoughts. None approached. All watched. You were being remembered. Soon the mist began to glow, and then it parted. You floated into a cavern so wide and high it could have contained mountains. But it wasn't space that mattered here. It was time. Time here hung from the ceiling like roots of ancient trees, each thread glimmering faintly, swaying with the movement of invisible winds. Beneath those roots, scattered across the cavern floor, were pools, still glowing, soft with color. Each one pulsed with a rhythm you felt in your ribs. You passed one, and it showed a memory. A child, human, walking beside a lizard-like figure, hand in hand, in a garden of floating stones. The child asked no questions. The guardian answered none. And yet everything was understood. You passed another. A battle, not with weapons, but with forgetting. A city of light fading as the last of the scaled ones slipped through a passage in the earth. They did not mourn. They left their songs in the stone. More pools, more glimpses. Some were of worlds that weren't Earth at all. Moons bathed in violet light, oceans that sang instead of waved, stars blooming in places stars should not grow. The river knew them all, and so did you. At some point the current slowed. Your boat came to rest beside a bank made of pale sand that shimmered with veins of silver. You stepped ashore. Your guide was already waiting, but it was not the same one. This one was older, much older. Its scales were duller, its eyes deeper, and it carried a staff grown from root and bone. It nodded slowly, as if it had been waiting for you not for years, but for lifetimes. It turned and began to walk. You followed. The path now was unlike any you had walked before. It wound through a garden that had never seen sunlight. The trees here grew upside down, their trunks coiling downward into glowing soil. Flowers bloomed soundlessly from shadows, and strange insects fluttered past, wings like translucent leaves, glowing with unreadable symbols. The old one led you to a grove. In its center stood a mirror, not made of glass, but of water held upright, rippling slowly as if stirred by a distant heartbeat. The figure pointed. You stepped forward and looked inside, and saw not your reflection, but all the versions of you that had ever lived. Not just lives from this world, but from countless others. Shapes with wings, shapes made of light, shapes that never spoke a word but knew only song. All of them were you. All of them were watching. Then you blinked, and the mirror stilled. Only you remained. The guide bowed deeply, then stepped aside. Behind the mirror, a gate had opened. It led downward, always downward. But you no longer feared the dark. You entered, and the earth welcomed you once more. Part 8. The Cathedral of the First Light. You did not remember walking. You only knew you had arrived. The gate behind you had faded, swallowed by roots and mist. Before you, a hallway stretched endlessly, carved from obsidian and lit by veins of golden crystal that pulsed with a rhythm older than breath. There were no doors here, no branches, only forward. The silence was absolute, yet full, as if the very walls hummed with memory, too dense for sound. Your footsteps fell softly, though the floor beneath you was polished like still water. Shadows passed slowly across its surface, shadows of people not present. Some were tall and scaled, some were not, but all moved with reverence like pilgrims visiting something sacred. You followed the light. At the end of the corridor, the world opened. You stepped into a cavern beyond size or name. It was not shaped by nature, nor by tool, but by intention. A perfect dome rose above you, so high it faded into darkness. At its center was a light, not bright but immense. It burned like a sun wrapped in sleep, quiet, golden, slow. You felt its warmth in your chest more than on your skin. It was suspended above a stone platform, which spiraled gently into the air, unsupported. Around it, rows upon rows of towering figures sat in silence. They were the lizard people, the Watchers. But these were not like the others you had met. They were older, vaster. Some seemed carved from crystal, others from root or smoke. They did not breathe, yet they were deeply alive. And they watched you. You stepped forward. Each footfall echoed softly in the great chamber, though the air was thick with stillness. You climbed the spiral, and with every step, memories returned, not your own, not fully, but echoes. You remembered stars being sung into place, planets wrapped in gold thread. You remembered shaping sound into structure, thought into stone. At the platform's center you stopped. The light hovered inches above your head, and then it spoke, not in words, not even in thoughts, but in stillness. It was the first light, not of the sun, not of fire, the light that remembers, the light that shaped the hollow paths when the surface world was still water and ash. You reached toward it, and it touched you. You did not burn. You dissolved. You became the city and the river and the watchers. You became the songs carved in crystal, the breath of the trees rooted in the deep, the memory in the moss. You became every child who had ever dreamed of passage, and every ancient who had stood watch over the quiet places beneath the world. You saw it all, the fall of the surface, the silence of retreat, the long sleep beneath, and the promise not to return, but to remain, to keep memory alive for those who forgot, to guard the soft thread of time. Then slowly the light faded. You were still yourself, but more. The spiral lowered gently, and the watchers bowed, not with movement but with stillness. You descended the steps, and a new guide waited. This one was smaller, younger. Its eyes were wide and clear, its scales soft with iridescent green. It did not speak, but placed its hand to its heart. You felt peace ripple outward from the gesture, warm and endless. It led you toward a new passage carved in silver stone, arched in gold. As you stepped through, the chamber vanished behind you, but the light remained within you, not as fire, as memory. Part 9. Beneath Names Beyond Form. The tunnel the young guide led you through was unlike any other you had seen. It did not spiral, nor descend, nor stretch in straight lines. It shifted around you, walls flowing gently like liquid crystal, ceiling arching and flattening in slow rhythm, like the inside of something living. And perhaps it was. There was no light, yet everything glowed softly. The guide never turned, never looked back, yet you felt a connection, like a thread of understanding that passed through you both. It was no longer leading you, you were moving together. At times the walls flickered with images, a star being born inside a dark sea, a sleeping city on the back of something vast and breathing, a seed made of light planted into stone. None of it made sense. All of it felt true. Then came the gate. Not a door, but a veil, woven from strands of shadow and silver mist, drifting slowly as if underwater. The guide stopped and stepped aside. This was not a place it could enter. You nodded, a motion made slowly, reverently, and stepped through. On the other side was no chamber, no city, no forest, only space, a wide, circular plain, smooth as glass and darker than night, lit only by the faint shimmer of your breath. Shapes hovered in the distance, too far to see clearly. They shifted when you tried to look at them. Forms unformed, presences without shape. Then they began to move, not toward you, around you, circling. You felt no fear. They were the oldest ones, not lizard, not human, not anything remembered by language. Guardians not of places, but of memory itself. Here, where all things were stripped of name, they kept the truths that no tongue could speak. One came forward. It did not have eyes or a face, but it knew you. It entered your mind not like a whisper, but like a wind stirring leaves that had long since fallen. You are near the root, it said, not in words, but in something deeper. What you seek cannot be held, only understood. A pulse of warmth passed through your chest. The others gathered closer. You saw flashes, a great city shaped like a spiral galaxy, built underground after the sky turned against them. A council of scaled elders handing memory stones to human children in dreamlike rituals. A temple filled with orbs of pure consciousness, resting in the hollows of living trees. Then silence again. They showed you the root, a single thread of light beneath the plain, thinner than hair, stretching downward into blackness so deep even memory had not followed. It pulsed once, and your knees buckled. The oldest truth had no name, no voice, no face, but it knew you, and it let you remember. There had never been separation. Surface and depth were illusions. You had been born from below before you ever stood under the sun. You had dreamed upward, and the world above was just the echo of what the hollowearth had already known. The oldest one drifted backward. You may carry this, it said, but not all at once. The others began to fade, retreating into the folds of the unseen. Only the thread of light remained. You knelt beside it, touched it, and it did not break. Instead, it hummed, and slowly it curled upward, winding around your wrist, your arm, your heart. Not to bind, to remind. You rose. The veil behind you shimmered. Your guide was still waiting, small, patient, kind. As you passed back through, it bowed once more, and this time it walked beside you, not ahead, because now you remembered the way. Part 10. Return through the roots. The path no longer wound. It opened. You and the guide walked side by side through corridors that no longer glowed, no longer whispered, but simply were. The walls were quiet now, content, as though they had told you what they were meant to tell, and rested. The floor beneath your feet was warm, not from light, but from life. Up ahead, the stone curved wide once more, and you stepped into the final chamber. It was not vast, it was not grand, it was simple. A round room, its ceiling low and curved like the inside of a seed. In the center, a shallow pool. Still, silver, perfect. The air here tasted like water and root and rain. The guide did not speak. It turned to you, eyes gleaming faintly in the dim. You understood. This was where the journey began. Not yours alone, but all journeys. The descent into remembering, the quieting of the world above, the return to the soil of origin. This was where the first breath of the earth had whispered itself awake, where memory had been planted not in books or songs, but in stone. You knelt beside the pool and looked in. You saw yourself, not as you had been, not as the surface knew you, but as a thread in a vast tapestry, woven of stars and silence, of laughter and loss, of stone and sky. A traveler, a seed, a witness, and then a ripple. The pool stirred. A wind moved that did not touch your skin, but your spirit. You felt yourself rising, not your body, not your mind, but your remembrance. You were being lifted gently by the earth itself, carried upward on unseen roots of thought and time. You closed your eyes. When you opened them, you were standing again at the edge of the forest. The trees were as they had been. The sky above was pale with morning. You looked down. Your feet were clean, dry, But in your hand you held something, a single smooth stone, warm with a faint pulse, etched with a spiral too perfect to be natural. You turned it in your palm. It hummed just once, a goodbye or a promise. You stepped from the trees. No one waited, no one watched. And yet the stillness around you felt full, as though the earth itself had remembered you, had welcomed you home. And in your chest something deep and old and peaceful had awakened. Not a secret, not a truth, just a whisper, soft as moss, quiet as root. You were never above. You only forgot how deep you truly are. And with that, you walked on, not upward but forward, carrying the hollow earth within you, forever,